Will this season pass card be better than Loki? Well, we're going to talk about it in this video where we take a look at the upcoming October season of cards. These finally got officially revealed. We know what the meta is going to look like, so it's time to lock in some star ratings, some predictions for how these cards are going to perform, both in the short term and in the long term. And I think this is actually a really strong season of cards, both some like specific niche applications that could be really powerful in like one or two decks, but also some more broader use cards I think could be powerful as well. And it all starts with ELSA Bloodstone, the upcoming season pass card. So when it comes to ELSA, man, I think this card looks really good, and we're going to talk about why. She is a 2/2 at a base, and she reads, if you play another card to fill a location, give it +3 power. Quick note, the reveal video for this did say ongoing, but then it was later confirmed she doesn't actually have ongoing. So maybe some old out-of-date graphics. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but she doesn't have ongoing, confirmed by Marvel Snap Devs, which is fine. She's a triggered effect. That's kind of what we would expect. And this makes ELSA a really big potential stat output card for a 2-cost card, living in a similar sort of space as something like Angela, starting small but then scaling up. I guess collectors kind of like that these days as well. Morbius, there's a few cards that live in this space. ELSA's conditionality here encourages you to fill up your locations, and certainly things like swarm decks that are going wide with multiple small cards, zoo decks can do that pretty effectively. And one card in particular seems to jump out as an absolutely crazy busted synergy for ELSA Bloodstone, which is Kitty Pryde. Get 3 spots filled, play Kitty Pryde as the 4th, and much like that Kitty Pryde can juice up Angela turn after turn after turn, ELSA Bloodstone can actually juice up your Kitty Pryde turn after turn after turn. So there is some absolutely nut potential there. Just ELSA giving a free +3 power every single turn. When you replay that Kitty yourself getting +1, those stats are going to start to scale like crazy, which of course can be really nice. We've already got Shuri Kitty decks that exist where you're trying to build a big Kitty and then Shuri it and then Taskmaster it. Well, ELSA could frankly feed really nicely into that package as well, just giving you those monster kitties to play on turn 6. Outside of the kitty scenario, I still think ELSA has a lot of potential. Just filling one location effectively makes this a 2/5. And this word confused you guys last time. Effectively, I'm saying she's worth 5 power. She herself does not actually literally become a 2/5, but effectively has 5 total power output for 2 cost. So I think in many scenarios, this is pretty easily achieved as a 2/5 or a 2/8 effective stat line, which is really good, of course. Like, that's super efficient. We're happily playing 2/4s, 2/5s just for their bodies on board. So when this works, it's great. The floor of a 2/2, that's okay to start. As soon as you get one location filled, a 2/5 feels great. Anything from there is really bonus and upside as far as I'm concerned. It makes this card great. So any deck that's able to reliably fill 2 spots, you don't even have to go over the 3rd. ELSA probably feels like a really powerful play. There could also be some really big surprising stuff as well, like the Kitty Pryde. I think there's some Mysterio synergies here that exist. Really, anytime you're trying to scale up stats, ELSA could serve that utility as well, kind of like a pseudo Forge, a little bit different. You know, not good with Brood, specifically like Forge, but could do similar sorts of things if you need a specific card's stats to be higher for whatever reason, because of scaling or some kind of trigger-based effect. So ultimately what that means is, you know, I think there could be decks built pretty specifically toward this with Dazzler and Swarm stuff, and that could be its own kind of archetype. I think big kitty scaling, kind of like we see with Shuri Kitty today, is absolutely a possibility for ELSA Bloodstone as well, as a kind of different or, you know, new-ish spin on a deck idea. But I think ELSA probably has utility beyond that as well. There are plenty of decks that play enough cards that they expect to fill up a couple locations, and ELSA might just offer plenty of upside there as a good scaling 2-drop that can also distribute stats nicely across various locations. Whereas Angela, sometimes, you know, you're stacking all your stats in one spot, which can be beneficial, but can also be risky. ELSA, you're spreading them across multiple cards in many cases, and that could have its own sort of benefits and help dodge removals. Shadow Kings not all stacking up on a single removal target. Shang-Chi's might be easier to dodge. those sorts of things are possible as well. So to me, this looks like a really high utility card, pretty crazy stat output. This is one of those I could see going down to 2-0, much like Collector and Angela and Morbius. All the other 2-cost scalers seem to go to 0 at some point or another. So yeah, I think this is good. Do I think it's as good as Loki? No. I think it's a little bit different. Loki is just like absolutely meta defining and warping, and you know, he defines decks basically all by himself. I don't think Elsa is quite that like definitive of a card. She's not, you know, an entire deck might be built to encourage her, but she's not like the game defining, game winning kind of play all the time. With Shuri Kitty, I mean, with Kitty Elsa, she kind of might be. Just not quite at that level, but still really strong. Loki's kind of in like this S tier all on his own, but Elsa's maybe the next tier down. I think looks to me like a really good, strong option. And I think this is a card we will actually see a lot and might even eventually get nerfed. I'm not sure that preemptive Kitty nerf will be enough here to really slow down that combination, because that looks kind of crazy strong. So moving on here, we've got Black Knight, and as a sword-wielding character, he is a discard synergy card. He's a 1/2, and he reads, after you discard a card, add the Ebony Blade to your hand with that card's power once per game. And the Ebony Blade is a 4-cost play, which means anytime you're discarding something big and scary, the Ebony Blade becomes big and scary option. So, you know, Infinite is the kind of go-to example. Play Black Knight on 1, play a Lady Sif on turn 3. She discards your highest cost thing. If that's an Infinite, you play the Ebony Blade on turn 4 as a 4/20, which is honestly kind of completely bonkers. Maybe you run a Giganto as a backup plan. Well, guess what? You got a 4/14. Still bonkers. You're still really happy with that result. Keep in mind, because of the way this works too, the Ebony Blade does not like steal from the discard pool. So the Infinite is still in your discard pool, which means you can also still Ghost Rider. So you can play Ghost Rider to pull back another Infinite or Giganto or whatever your heart desires. And then you basically have 2 4/20s in your deck, or a 4/23 in the case of Ghost Rider. So, you know, if the curve lines up here with Black Knight into Sif, you really, you know, you only need the Ghost Rider to have, that's like game winning right there. That's 2 locations that are just absolutely getting hammered by some crazy plays. And it doesn't maybe have to be that nuts to feel that rewarding either. So I do think there is a pretty clear line here for like a big discard deck. I don't know if it's like the Hela stuff so much. This might need to rely more on the Ebony Blade and the Ghost Rider itself. Maybe there are layers of backup plans and so on. Who knows? But a lot of potential here for this to just be absolutely game defining. And, you know, you don't need much. Like literally, could this be put into decks with just a big card, a Sif, and a Black Knight? Do you need more than that? Could you make it work with that game plan? Maybe. I don't know that that's enough. You might need additional discard synergies or some other reason to want and have those big cards in your deck, but it's so strong that I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if decks just started tossing this in. You know, if you got like a Zabu deck or something, this is a pretty natural 4-drop to go along with it. So there is some like sequencing issues, you know, like the Black Knight needs to come down first, basically. There are the potential to have other discards you want to play that don't fit in between. So, you know, if you ran this in a full discard deck, you wanted to play Black Knight on 1 and you wanted to play Colleen Wing on 2, well, shoot, that's going to mess up your Black Knight because that's going to discard a Swarm or whatever. Then your Ebony Blade is going to be a 4/3. So you need to wait till the Sif. So there is a little bit of clunkiness there. I mean, obviously there's like Black Knight, Morbius, Sif lines that would work fine, but there is at least, you know, some acknowledgement of deck construction and hand sequencing issues that do, you know, have to fit for this card to make a lot of sense. But I think the payoff here is so high and the risk is so low. In other words, oh, I played a 1/2. It's not a disaster if things don't work out. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. So, you know, low risk, really, really high reward sort of card. A little bit of finagling will be necessary to make it work, but I think that's not going to be a challenge for this when the payoff is so big and so significant. So I absolutely think there will be a deck that makes this work in some way. It's going to feel really good. It's not one of those cards, obviously, that's universal across multiple decks. or multiple archetypes. So really specific in its niche, but really powerful potentially in that niche as well. So next up here is Werewolf by Night, a 3/3 that reads, after you play an on reveal card at another location, move there and gain +2 power. So Werewolf by Night here is going to be bouncing all around on board and gaining 2 power every time that he does. So that's 3/5, 3/7, 3/9 here for the Werewolf by Night, getting bigger and bigger over time. And of course, that can also support move synergies along the way. If you have a Craven sitting next to the Werewolf by Night there, every time he moves, he's going to hit your Craven. He's going to buff himself. Just all that bouncing around can be really beneficial in those instances. And the thing is, you don't actually have to run this in a move deck. His proc is independent of any other sort of thing. It just has to be on reveals. So it's actually pretty flexible in what kind of decks can actually run this. So you could have some real hybrid packages here, maybe with a couple move cards that benefit from move. We already see that with the Craven and Silk and Jeff package, and Spider-Man sometimes too, and Miles sometimes as well, all popping into a kind of a tempo move shell. It's not a dedicated move deck, but a package in lots of other decks. I feel like Werewolf by Night actually fits pretty well into that as well. Maybe instead of Spider-Man, you have something like Werewolf by Night, and then you have a handful of other on-reveal cards to support this and just bounce your Werewolf by Night around the board, making him a really nice independent threat there. I think if you get up to 3/7, 3/9 range, you're pretty excited here by the Werewolf by Night. You might also just have other cards or decks that just spam on-reveal stuff and almost try to use the Werewolf by Night as their win condition of sorts, just playing a bunch of low cost, 1-drop, 2-drop on reveals and just moving him around the board like crazy. I could even see a card like Snow Guard enabling Werewolf by Night, particularly in a pre-nerf version when you just had that's basically 3 cheap on reveals in one. Now that those are 3 cost, it's a little iffier, but maybe there's like a Snow Guard Silver Surfer deck with Werewolf by Night where you're lining up all that 3 cost stuff. So your gears just start turning with this card pretty quickly in all the different homes and scenarios and worlds where he fits, because he has multiple kind of directions of rewards, both that he scales himself, he benefits stuff like that Craven we talked about. He's got the 3-drop angle for Silver Surfer, on reveal angles, with plenty of decks running on reveals, probably the most common keyword in Marvel Snap. And I think he's almost destined to find a home because of that. There are some challenges perhaps with this card, things like board space and like overstacking stats. If you want to play a big final card on turn 6, your Werewolf by Night's going to land where your big final card is, and that's kind of iffy. You might not be able to distribute him exactly where you want, kind of overcommit into certain scenarios. Like if you're playing that Eliath on turn 6, Werewolf by Night's going to move to your Eliath. It's like, oh, well, that's not very good. So like clearly that's not something you have to do, but there might be certain decks or structures of decks where he doesn't necessarily fit in because you have a big turn 6 pop-off card or payoff or something where he doesn't necessarily line up well. So, some restrictions here in that regard with board space and so on, but I still think a card that looks really flexible and feels like something's going to make this work. Probably a Silver Surfer deck to start, and I imagine there are at least a few other homes for this one beyond that as well. But ultimately, feels so flexible and so free and just gives you nice bonuses along the way that's a recipe for success, I think, for sure. All right, moving on over to Man-Thing. We have a card here I think was probably a little bit more specific in its use cases. Man-Thing's a 4/5 with ongoing 1, 2, and 3 cost cards here have -2 power. So that is a symmetrical effect. Keep in mind that affects both you and the opponent. So you're not going to want to have your small stuff next to Man-Thing, but anytime your opponent has multiple smaller low cost cards in a single location, Man-Thing starts to gain a lot of total net power. So a single 1-drop, he's a 4/7. 2 low-cost things, he's a 4/9. If they had 4, he would effectively be a 4/13 because he'd give -8 to the opponent plus 5 to you. That's a net gain of 13, which is clearly really strong for a 4-drop. Now, there aren't a lot of natural board states that happens. We have had some zoo decks here and there where that would be a possibility. Discard dumping a bunch of swarms, for instance. This could be a really cool play to that sort of thing. But not too many organic board states where I think that happens naturally. Maybe you catch 2 cards with Man-Thing on occasion, which honestly makes him a 4/9, which isn't bad. But that also restricts you because you maybe can't support him with small cards very effectively on your own to kind of even out the math or just get to the right break points. Sometimes that's important to have a 2 or a 1 drop alongside one of your bigger cards to just get that math over the hump. Gets a little awkward in those cases with Man-Thing. So if he's harder to use in those general organic board states, you have to start thinking about ways to use him specifically. And thankfully, I think he has a home for that, which is in junk decks. We've got all these various decks that give garbage to your opponent. Sometimes that's green goblins. Very often that's things like rocks with debris. We've got vipers sending small stuff over to your opponent. And in those cases, when you know you're giving your opponent all of that little stuff, those rocks in particular, Man-Thing becomes really effective as a way to probably single-handedly carry a location. So if you've got a rock down and they got a 1 drop down, Man-Thing suddenly that 4/9, they're limited on space as well. So it's hard for them to add enough power per position to really come back at the Man-Thing. So this feels like a really good piece of the puzzle here for junk decks. I think this becomes a great payoff. Probably single-handedly carries lanes in those instances once you've given them some rocks or maybe one other piece of junk here and there. And it won't be hard to find the right places for that either, because, you know, they've already played a 1 drop, they've already played a 2 drop there. Man-Thing comes down with a rock. That location's probably sealed, and you feel really good about that as well. So I do think, junk decks are definitely not tier 1 decks by any means, but they're often played and viable, and, you know, people can climb with them. So that puts Man-Thing in a solid spot. I don't think this ever becomes a meta staple unless we get some really aggressive low cost metas where there's just a ton of zoo decks and so on out there. I mean, maybe in the ELSA Bloodstone world, there's a little more of that as people are trying to fill spaces. So this could exist as a bit of a natural counter. But I think most of the time, on average, in the long-term sense, Man-Thing's probably going to be limited to more specific use cases where you're forcing that game plan and making your opponent suffer all those small cards. But in those instances, again, feels like a pretty good card. Maybe not as crazy as Black Knight, or the power spikes seem really big, but still useful, high utility, and valuable in those cases. So our final card of the video here is Nico Minoru, and man, a lot of people seem so pumped about this card. It is pretty fun looking. She is a 1/2 with an on reveal. After you play your next card, cast a spell, and the spell changes each turn. So basically, this text here you won't actually see in game. As soon as Nico Minoru enters your hand, she's going to take on one of these specific on reveals. I think we're told it's chosen at random. There is no like sequence to this. It'll just pick a random one that it hasn't been before this game, and that's what it'll be on the next turn. So like if you draw her on turn 1, she might say on reveal, after you play your next card, it becomes a demon. If you don't decide to play Nico because you don't want that effect, you have a 2 drop you really want to play, you hold her in hand, you go to turn 2, she might say on reveal, after you play your next card, give it +2 power. And you're like, okay, that actually sounds really cool. I got a brood I want to play on turn 3. I'm going to drop Nico on turn 2. Her on reveal becomes that. You play your brood on turn 3. Boom. You're super happy that your Nico paid off. So basically what that means is all of these effects, I wouldn't say all of them, most of them have like some good general utility, like they just do something that's good. Some of them have more specific utility that can sometimes be very powerful, but might also be a bit of a risk or a potential downside in certain game states, which might make Nico feel a little bit stuck in hand. And then others have like really specific upside too, where it's like, man, if I line this up on the right turn or the right card, like we just talked about with that brood, it could be an absolute crazy sort of high roll. And I'm a little more torn on this than most people about finding the right opportunities to play Nico. So some of these are just like always good, you know, like give your card +2 power, your next card, that's just always going to be good. It doesn't have to be brood. That just makes Nico effectively a 1/4. That feels nice and efficient. It's kind of free. You can just, tempo that out early and you're happy. Same thing probably for on reveal. After you play your next card, double this card's power. Again, that makes her a 1/4. If you got some hand buffs or something, maybe even more than that. But, fine at a baseline, just effectively, or literally in this case, a 1/4. And then some of them are like more value generating, add a copy to your hand. etc. Some though, like move it to the right, it becomes a demon, destroy it and draw 2 cards. Some of those might be really limiting. Like if you're on turn 5 and you want to play, you know, your Nico because you finally drew it and you just want to like weave it into the turn, and it says your next card becomes a demon. Well, shoot, does that kill your turn 6? Does that kill something you're trying to play with it on turn 5? Like sometimes that's going to be a real downside because you had an effect and on reveal a text that you really wanted to get, and the demon is not going to feel good. So you might be stuck kind of holding on to the Nico in hand. Same thing with destroy it and draw 2 cards. Like sometimes the early game that might be fine, especially if you have some kind of destroy synergy or something. And what will happen, I think, is people will start trying to build these like little release valves in their deck. It's like, well, I need to make sure I have something to destroy in case I hit the destroy part of Nico, or I need to have something that I want to move in case I have the move part. So I'm going to put in a Bucky Barnes. I'm going to put in a Vulture, you know, just like try to solve these little problems that the card is creating. So I don't know. There's like, in other words, there's basically opportunity cost here with Nico, where sometimes she'll be a card that feels bad to play instead of good to play. And would you have preferred to just have a 1-drop or some other card in that slot that's always safe to play and always feels good? In other words, is the upside on Nico here good enough that the opportunity cost downside is overcome? And I think there are certainly moments it will be. If you have that Brood, yeah, that's going to be amazing sometimes. She's like a worse Forge. A little better maybe because she's cheaper, but you get the idea. So I don't know. I think in a lot of cases in Marvel Snap, we value consistency and reliability. You know, it's not much. It's only 1 energy. Sometimes it's fine, but that's a card in your deck. That's a slot. That's something you could have drawn. So you're giving up that choice, giving up that little potential power, giving up that energy efficiency. So, man, I don't know. In some ways, I think this could be one of those like general use 1-drops that a lot of decks just find a home for, and it just sometimes has some cool upsides, and you're really happy about that. In other cases, I think you might want 1-drops that are just more predictable and do exactly what you want them to do. And, you know, like I just want Iceman because Iceman always does something useful and I can always play the Iceman and it's totally fine. It never backfires. So I'm definitely a little bit lower on this card than I've seen some people saying, like, this is going to be a 1-drop staple. Like, this is going to be the new 1-drop everybody plays. I think this card looks really fun. I'm really excited to try it because, you know, the chaos here and the kind of various game lines and states and trying to adapt to this card in hand, that's all going to be really enjoyable. But I don't know if that's going to be the sort of consistency we look for in Marvel Snap decks. So I'm actually really curious what you guys think about this one. Are you super high on Nico, or do you have some of the same concerns that I do? There's definitely... I've actually seen way more opinions differing with me than agreeing with me on this one. So I definitely might be the odd man out, as it were, with Nico Minoru. All right, so now let's do some star ratings on these cards. I'm going to rank them from my highest to my lowest from 1 to 4 stars. ELSA Bloodstone is a 4-star card. Black Knight is a 4-star card. Werewolf by Night is a 3-star card. Man-Thing is a 3-star card. Nico Minoru is a 2-star card. Oh yeah, I just realized that that was the exact same order I did them in the video. That just felt like a coincidence, but the cards happen to be arranged in the order, I think, of their power level or impact here on the meta, basically. So all in all, pretty strong month. And the one card I gave kind of a lower score to there, the Nico Minoru, a lot of people like that one. So I may be very wrong about that one, and actually this month could be, you know, good across the board, perhaps. Who knows? So regardless, really excited. I think some really fun designs in this one. We're very excited to play Black Knight, very excited to play Man-Thing in particular. Those jump out to me as enjoyable. I think Elsa's going to do some crazy stuff. Nico looks quite fun. Honestly, Werewolf by Night looks fun too, bouncing around like crazy. So this is one of the better looking months as far as both power level and I think enjoyment level are concerned for these Marvel Snap cards. Curious to hear your thoughts though down in the comments below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.